Today we're going to continue our learning of JavaScript, and now we're moving into JavaScript frameworks. And frameworks give us an easier way to accomplish a lot of the things we want to do in JavaScript. And one of the most popular ones is jQuery. And so we're going to start learning jQuery and different frameworks today. A framework is not a new language. You don't say, I'm writing in jQuery or I'm writing in Angular. We use a framework to help us in the language of JavaScript. And so there are many frameworks for many different languages, but frameworks are a tool that make your life easier. There are so many JavaScript frameworks out there: MooTools, React, Angular, D3. We're going to learn D3 too, but all of these things are ways to help do a very specific type of job, and the code is pre-written. And so the concept is you load in someone else's code, you load in this framework code, and then you can reference it and access it rather than having to start from scratch and writing everything from scratch. There's so many JavaScript frameworks out there, I can't even count them all. I did a quick search and found over 50 that people are using presently today. But the reason we chose jQuery for this class is because, one, it's one of the most popular. It is on over 70 million websites, or close to 70 million websites, and it is across the 90% of all of the top tier websites in the world. And so we know it's being used widely. It's also well documented and easy to implement. There are lots of plugins and documentation out there, lots of tutorials. And so from a student's perspective, it's really an easy way to get into it. And then I really like their plugin concept. So it's really easy to load jQuery and then load on additional plugins for functionality that really makes your life a lot easier. So it's a good one to start and learn on. Now, that being said, I like jQuery for those purposes, but there are things that I don't like about it. For example, it's a little bit bloated. It has takes up a lot of extra space, memory, loading time, and so that's one problem with it. And some of these other frameworks make it a little bit easier to code. If you're an object-oriented or you like certain other formats, there are other frameworks you may like better. But for now, we're going to learn jQuery. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of jQuery plugins out there. If you can think of a UI concept that you want to do, there's probably a jQuery plugin. But it's not just limited to UI. There's also ways of loading and storing data and working with databases and all these other plugins that are out there. And so you're going to be able to pull those into your interfaces to make those a little bit better, a little bit more interactive. So here's how we get started in jQuery. This order matters, so I want you to pay attention here. First, we have to load the jQuery file. So we're going to do a script include tag. We're going to load the jQuery. Then, if you're going to load any plugins, you're also going to put those right below that in your HTML. And then we also need a document ready function. So it's on document ready. It's a function that tells us when the page is loaded. Those three things have to come in that particular order. If you're using a plugin, you need that second one. But those three things have to be in that particular order because it won't work otherwise and you'll get errors. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get the latest version of jQuery. So what we'll do is we're going to go to just Google search jQuery CDN. And the reason I said CDN is because it's a content delivery network, and that is jQuery hosting your file for you. Now you could run it locally, as you can see I have in the slides, but what we're going to do is to copy the minified version, jQuery Core 3.5 minified. So I want you to control or right click on this and copy link as, well, sorry, you don't actually have to control click. They actually give it to you there. So just click on it and it will actually give you the actual code that we need. We don't have to put the script tag in. So copy that code. So click on minified and copy that code. Then you're going to come over here into your HTML page. So today's files are available from the class website. Download the starter files, and that's where we'll be starting from today. You're going to open the index.html file, and you're going to go down to right above where our script file is, and we're going to load this at the end of our HTML content. So now we're loading in the jQuery code, and if you were to look at that file, it is just a spit out of JavaScript with no spacing, all minified. But there's all these different functions and things that we can now call and that we can use it. And so we want to make sure that our page loads, that we get the HTML loads, then this file loads, and then our JavaScript will load. Now, one reason I like to use the CDN over hosting it locally is because if one of those other millions of other sites that your user has previously visited and they have the latest version of jQuery already cached in their browser, that's one less thing that their browser has to load on your site. So essentially, you're helping everyone else and they're helping you if we all use the latest version whenever possible, and that just speeds up the load time for everybody across the internet. So here I have the jQuery loaded in to line 27. Okay. When the DOM is ready, DOM means the document object model. In our case, that really means the HTML document and all of its features. Okay, but the document object model, and the model is how we access it and how we get ready. So we're going to essentially select the document to know when it is fully loaded. And jQuery makes it easy for us to do that. They provide what's called the document ready function. And if you wanted to find this, you would go to Google and just put jQuery document ready, and look, it just pops in there, and it's the first one here. Okay. So what you're going to do is copy this, and you're going to go to your main.js file, and we're going to put that in there. Now, let me walk you through what this means. Anytime you see $sign means jQuery. So jQuery, select the document and run the ready function that was written in jQuery's code. Okay. And then once that is ready, then do this. And so in our case, we're going to console log that it's ready. Okay. So let's save it, go to our HTML page, and we'll refresh, and we should see some code that says it is ready, but we don't. It says reference area $sign is not defined. So what's going on? $sign is not defined. You're going to see this over and over again, and the reason I brought this up is I wanted you to see this and make sure you see this error, you know exactly what it means. What it means is that my jQuery has not loaded. $sign means jQuery, jQuery means $sign, and so it hasn't loaded. Intentionally, I did not save the file, so this one did not actually get written to the page. So now I've saved it. jQuery is here. jQuery is going to load, then my main.js should load, and this should work. So we're going to try this one more time, and now it says ready. Okay, so whenever you see $sign is not defined, that means jQuery is not defined. This is important. jQuery equals $sign equals jQuery. So whenever you see the $sign, you will know that means the word jQuery. So you can read it this way. When I'm looking at code, I read this as jQuery select the document. Okay. All right, next step. jQuery is built around the concept of selecting different items in the HTML. It's really easy to select items. All you need to do is put it in the $sign jQuery parentheses. So if we want to select a p tag in this example, all we have to do is put in quotes p, because this is an element of HTML, and then whatever function we're going to do. So we'll do the hide function. So we're going to hide the p text. We're going to select it and then hide it. Okay. Oops. Excuse me. So right here, we'll do $sign parentheses p dot hide. Okay. Now looking at our HTML, we have one p tag that says learning jQuery p tag. Okay, so here in our HTML, you see it there. When I refresh this page, once everything loads, you should watch it disappear. And there it's gone. Okay, so it selected the p tag. If I had multiple p tags, if I had a bunch of paragraphs there, it would have selected all of them and hidden them. So that's how we select multiple items of a particular HTML element, but we can be more precise and we can select IDs or classes and other things. So just to reiterate how jQuery selection works, whatever's in these parentheses is what it's going to try to select or find. Okay. And then it performs the action after it finds it. So if I change this to a pound ID name or a dot class name, right, like dot my class, it will select just anytime those classes appear on the page. If there's 3 of them, it'll select all 3. But if we do a pound content, it will only select the first ID that has content. And there should only be one, right? Because ID should only be one time on the page. So that will select the first and only ID with the name of content. So let's go ahead and create a button, and we're going to put a button event that's going to hide the ID when we click the button. So we're kind of tying a few pieces here together. First thing we're going to do is go to our HTML. Note that on this slide, I've put the HTML at the top so you can see both on the same screen. So in the HTML, we need to put a button class, which I've already given for you here, and it's just a tag button with click here. Then in our JavaScript, we're going to add a function for the button. It's called an event listener. Now, I could put this in the document ready or outside the document ready. Let's put it on the outside for right now. $, what did we just create? We called it something button. Dot click. And we're going to run a function every time something is clicked. Okay. So inside this click function or this click event that happens, first let's go ahead and console.log that it's clicked. That way we'll know, did the button actually work? So save it, we'll go refresh, click here, and then I see in my console that it does say it's clicked. Now the next step would be that we need to hide the content that we want. And we want to be a little more precise. So here in our HTML, we have an ID called the content. And so that's what we're going to select. So $, parenthesis, quote, pound the content, dot hide. And so now we are going to run the function of hide on the pound content whenever this button is clicked. So you see how this is all contained in this nice little function here. Okay. So when I'm going to save it, refresh it, and click here, it says it was clicked, and yes, it did disappear. So I click it, but now it doesn't work. I have to refresh the page again because it was set to hide. So we used the click function, but there's a lot of events that we could do where we select different elements. So we can select the first child, the last child, a particular node, and then apply any of those events on it. So some of the main events that you see in JavaScript are click, double click, mouse enter, key presses, the same types of things that we've seen in regular JavaScript. There's also ways of getting to that through jQuery as well. But if we wanted to make this hide and show every time, then what we want to do is to actually use a different function. So we could write logic that's like if it's hidden, then show, else hide, vice versa. And you could go through that logic. And that's what we would do if we had just plain vanilla or plain JavaScript. But since we have jQuery, there's a function prepared for this. Well, how would I know that that function exists? So let's go to our docs. So if you just go to docs.jquery.com, oops, sorry. It's called api.jquery.com. api.jquery.com. It has everything that is available. And each one of these with the parentheses is a different function that you can call upon. Okay, and so there's tons of them in here. And so the one we're going to use is toggle. And if I click on it, then I get the full documentation. So as I look at this documentation, one of the things that you want to make sure that you do is you know how to read documentation. So documentation is traditionally formatted in a similar way for most sites and functions and most frameworks. They explain what the thing does, like it gives it a basic description and how to use it, okay? And then it gives you any options or parameters that can be given. So you can see, you can set the duration, which is a string number determining how long the animation will run. So you just pass it 400 and it'll run for 400 milliseconds, okay? And so there's all these different functions or parameters of this functions that you can call, okay? So typically I kind of look through to see what my options are. And then I come down and I look at the examples. I feel that the examples are a really easy way to just kind of see what's going on. And typically they give you a default example and then they give you one that has a little bit more detail or some of the more functionality that you could use. So in this case, all we have to do is jQuery select the target ID here, or class ID, and then dot toggle. Okay. So if we come over here and we change this to dot toggle, and look at our page. Let me refresh it. And now it shows and hides and shows and hides. Now we got a UI problem because our button keeps jumping around, but that's not what we're trying to solve today. Okay, just wanted to show and hide. Okay. But as you get deeper and deeper into jQuery or any framework that you know well, you'll learn that there's other ones. So there's also a fade toggle, and I can look and read that, or I could just go ahead and try it. Fade toggle, and let's see what that does. It fades it in and out. Okay. And so that works really well. But we may want to add some parameters and put a little bit more control on it. Okay, so let's look at how we would do that. So here in the slides I've got, just so you can have it, here's the toggle and here's fade toggle, but we're going to add the two parameters that were in the docs, slow and linear. Okay, so we can pass these into the function. So you think about the functions we learned last week. This is a function called fade toggle that's accepting at least one argument, but could it receive a list of arguments? And it's listening for these two because I have a comma here. And so we have slow and linear, and this is going to do a linear fade in a slow rate. And there it goes and fades back in and out. Okay. So lots of functions that you can use in jQuery, and you just have to go look for them and see what you want to use. I've already shown you the documentation for the API. The API is the actual code that you're going to use, but I also want to encourage you to look at learn.jquery.com. There are lots of things there, lots of resources and tutorials to kind of get you going. If you're trying to work with events or you're trying to solve a very specific problem, there might be something there on the learn.jquery that's really helpful. So we have basic jQuery functionality, but then we also have plugin functionality. And plugins are how we add code that other people have written, third parties or other developers. They have written different pieces of code for us that we can implement. So we're going to use this one from Stephen Wagner. He has created a thing called JBox, and it's a jQuery plugin that lets you put little tooltips over any HTML element. And I'm using this one because it's a pretty good, easy example. It's pretty easy to implement and shows the basic ideas of plugin functionality. So you'll go to Stephen Wagner's JBox plugin documentation website, and he has an example of how this works. And that's really helpful, and it does work. And so what you want to do is go to the Get Started. And whenever I'm looking at a new plugin, the first thing I do is really go to Get Started and see, does he explain or he or she explain exactly how this is delivered? And so in this case, it does. It's an easy way to kind of understand what's going on. We're not using Node Package Manager, so you can ignore that part, but things that we'll recognize. We need jQuery, we'll load in the script, and we'll load in our CSS, and then we're going to basically create an instance of this, and then we've got some HTML. So he walks you through pretty easily, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing we need to do is go make sure we include everything that needs to be included. So you see how you have jQuery 3.51. You can only put jQuery on the page one time. One time. Okay, if you put this in twice, where it says load jQuery 2 different times, you're going to have a problem and it's going to fail. So make sure, even if you have multiple plugins, you only need jQuery once. Even if it's different versions, you only need one jQuery. Then you can load his script file. And then we also need to get the CSS. And I like to put all my CSS together. And so I put it right before my CSS files. Okay. So that is the proper loading of all the different files. We're going to save that. And then one thing I tend to do is just refresh and make sure everything loaded. I don't get any error there. So that's an easy way to just check and make sure it all loaded. Okay, and then now we need to go to that next step. So the next step is to create a new instance, and we're going to attach it to the class of .tooltip. So let's go to main.js, and we're going to say new instance of JBox tooltip. Okay, so basically create a tooltip. There's different functions you can pull in, but in this case, we're making a tooltip, not a modal or another type. Okay, and we're going to attach it to anything that has a class of tooltip. Okay. So that's good. We got it. We understand what that means. But then now we need to do a class tooltip in our HTML. So I'm going to copy this from the documentation, go back to the index, and I'll do this underneath my button. Let's put a div to give us some space. I'll close the div. And now I'll save that. Okay. Now you'll notice I'm not changing anything about this right now. The first time I use a plugin, I want to make sure everything's working like I think it's working. And so I tend to do exactly what the getting started or documentation says first. And then after I know it's working, then I can start to change it and customize it for my experience. Okay, so I save that, go back to our page, and we're going to refresh it. And if I hover over it, it says another tooltip. I hover over this one, my tooltip. Now, obviously, we need spacing, and there's not a lot here. But the CSS came in well for the tooltip, right? And so this looks really good. It works. And so now we have a plugin that is working. Okay, so now you might go in and start changing the text. Maybe there's different parameters, and you can go look through his documentation and see, is there different ways of changing out the CSS and those types of things. So some of these plugins have really, in-depth theming where you could do different styles and things that have already been created, or you can customize it. This one also has modal windows and notices and images and like all these different things you can put on them. And so you could go through and get the best of each of that documentation. Okay. So through the slides, I stepped you through how to implement this, and here's a copy of the code. Okay. Which gets us to you putting this into practice. So what I want you to do is to go back to your CSS project 1. And I want you to take those pie graphs that we ignored the rollover, and I want you to put the hover state of a little tooltip above the pie graphs. Okay. And then I also want you to take the announcement slider that's at the top and take those buttons and add some jQuery functionality that makes those announcements slide through. Okay, and so you can interpret that however you want, but you need at least 3 different pieces of text there that slide through. Maybe they fade, maybe they actually move, whatever you think looks best and would be best for your user. Okay. Feel free to kind of change and edit your code. I've already graded this assignment, so you don't have to worry about anything there. You can feel free to update and change as needed. But you're going to take the pie graphs and add a tooltip and take the announcement slider and make it actually slide.